It is 9 o'clock at night. It is raining outside. You're driving, no, I'm driving my car. You're going to go on a journey with me. I'm driving my car at about 70 miles an hour. There's a wall on this side, and everything is fine for that moment. Then all of a sudden, an animal, a deer, shows up on this side. Immediately, I swerve away from the animal and I pump the brakes because that's what you do in that situation. But now, all of a sudden, because it's raining outside, the car breaks loose, meaning it now starts to hydroplane at 70 miles an hour into the wall on this side. My first reaction is, I'm really not interested in hitting this wall. That would be a bad day. So instinctively, I start to steer away from the wall, but that is not the right thing to do because at that point, you steer into the skid, but that's not the thing that your brain does immediately. So I steer this way as quickly as possible. That doesn't work. I steer back the other way. I get control of the car again, but I'm 2 inches away from the wall. So I rip the car back, and now all of a sudden, I'm now going into a spin across 3 lanes of traffic. So somehow I stopped steering with this hand, switched to this hand, pulled the emergency brake. And now I do a spin across 3 lanes of traffic and somehow end up nestled on the other side of the road, pointing in the opposite direction, looking at a wall of traffic. Now, looking at your faces, all I did is told you a story. I was in it. I am an engineer, a businessman, a speaker. Nothing in the world could have prepared me for that 4 seconds. 4 seconds, 5 ways to die. And for some reason, I'm now standing in front of you having this talk. So there must be a reason for it. As I sat there on the side of the road and said, wait a minute now, what just happened? Because nothing happened, but something did happen, but you know that feeling. I did a U-E, turned the car around, and I started going in the proper direction. And 5 minutes later, I looked to the other side of the road, and there's blue lights and red lights. Someone was not as fortunate, meaning someone didn't make it. Someone was not Speed Racer for a moment. So I travel down the road, get to my destination 30 minutes later, and I sit down on the couch, and my body starts to ache. And in that moment, there's something going on here. There's nothing, I need to understand what just happened. Because now my body is aching. I cannot take my left hand and put it above my head. My right arm is sore. My body is starting to ache and hurt. It is paralyzed, actually, for the next 4 days. I'm concerned now. I'm a researcher. I'm a scientist. Somebody tell me what happened on the road back there. But nothing happened, but yet something happened, and I'm confused. So I'm going to take you on the journey now of what I found as I try to dismantle what happened on the road and then what I experienced over the next 4 days. So please indulge me. There are 4 stories that are going on at any given time. And when I was getting ready to go into the wall, every cell in my body screamed, you are about to die. Your body, you're done. Not my brain. Every cell in my body exploded. Brace for impact because it is now over. Epigenetics. Epigenetics will tell you that at the cellular level, your cells have consciousness. They have a brain. They communicate with each other. I believe that now. You can't tell me otherwise at this point. I did not have a year to contemplate death. I did not have any run-up with a doctor. There was no diagnoses. There was no telling the family, 4 seconds and you're done. Let me tell you what I found. As I continued to look to find answers, it took me to the foot of the Nile. This is a place called Abu Simbel. It is at the foot of the Nile there in Egypt. 15,000 years ago is when this particular monument was built. Let me tell you what it represents. First one, there's a physical body, meaning something physically is happening at any given time. The next one with its head off, surprisingly, is the emotional body. The one next to that is his mental body, and the next one after that is his intellectual body. When I saw this, I realized that this was the whole of life. This was how we experienced things. This is what I experienced on the highway, but I needed to have a construct to be able to deal with this because I'm trying to reconcile why I am still alive. So let me take you through those 4 stories in depth. At any given time, like me on the highway, what happened? I saw something and I responded. At any given time, your experiences do nothing but a perception. You're going to see it, hear it, touch it, smell it. We all do that. The problem is this: immediately a chemical reaction is going to occur within your body. You're going to have serotonin move. You're going to have all sorts of hormones move. Things are going to move instantaneously in a moment. You can't think. You're not thinking yet because now a chemical reaction has occurred. And here's what happens. The emotion of that day is now on me again. But it links you to your brain first. It has nothing to do except process the information, and it drops you into your heart. And there in your heart, things are going to start to occur. You're going to either experience a fight, flight, or in my case, fear and paralysis. If any of those 3 standard modalities of dealing with a critical situation had occurred, I would not be in front of you now. So there's this thing going on between our brains and our hearts, and then linking that feeling to the mental construct. There was nothing that I had in my mind to say, well, if I hit the wall, yes, if you hit the wall, you're going to be in bad shape. You're doing that all the time. Brain, heart, feeling, you're going to link that over to a mental picture, your past. This is where time exists. Because up until that point, you're going to see something, you're going to experience something chemically, that is now. And then all of a sudden, you're going to try to make that like something that you dealt with before, just like I did. For some reason, in that moment, I bypassed this process. Because if you think about it for a minute, the first danger was to break and swerve. The next one was to not brake at all, steer into the obstruction. The next one was to do what? Pull an emergency brake and jam on the brakes, and the next part was ride it out and hope that you don't fall off the embankment. 4 modalities. Had I stopped for a moment and thought, I wouldn't have made it. So at any given time, you're going from a mental construct, and then you do something very interesting. You try to bounce into a future based on everything you already know. And as soon as you bounce into a future, you went from now to the past, created time, and then you bounce into a future. Now I'm sitting here giddy because it's hit me one night as to what happened. I said, I've discovered time. But more importantly, I discovered how in the world I was able to navigate in 4 seconds like I was Speed Racer. I don't have that skill set. But in that moment, when I had to act critically to save my own life, I did. And I've now given you the very construct as to how, I don't know if it's how your brain works. I really think this is how life works because I told my 13-year-old, honey, this was, of course, after I call it the incident. Here's how it works. Things are going to happen in your life. It's going to happen. A what? You're going to feel a certain way about it, and there's nothing you can do about how you're going to feel about it, except if you don't link it to something in your past which is going to disempower you. All of your stories are very valid, but not all of them are powerful and make you capable. And if you disengage for a moment and you take a breath or take a drink of water, in that moment you might be able to make the decision that works for you as opposed to one that's going to work against you. As I went further in my research, now I've gone back to Egypt. I'm feeling great, but because I am an engineer, I want to have something to measure because that's just the way it is. I ran into this model. It's called the whole brain model by a company called Herman. It's a Herman Brain Dominance Instrument, HBDI. It just so happened that their A quadrant was a what? Their C quadrant was a who, emotional feeling. Their B quadrant was a how, mental construct. And their D quadrant was a why, the innovation future. I am now excited because now I can measure a story and know exactly how my story impacts how I think and relate with the world. But more importantly, this is a tool for business. And it's been used with 90% of the Fortune 100. So this is a valid tool to show me what was sitting on those hills 15,000 years ago that I happened to come across. This is the sequence. Something's going to happen. You're going to feel a certain way about it after the chemical reaction. You're going to look and say, what is this like? How can I plan for the future? And then you're going to make a future out of it, and there is where your belief will lie. If you can just stop for a moment, just a moment, of a nanosecond, because that's all I had, and take a breath. And before you link something in your past to something which is in the present and then make a future which may not serve you, take a breath. Because all I had was a heartbeat. And in that heartbeat, I lived a whole lifetime of action in a heartbeat. Some of us have all the time in the world to contemplate what we're going to do next. I had 2 breaths. And somehow, I'm able to stand before you today to give you just a little bit of what I found. All of us have been in a situation where we've been given a story that does not work for us. Whether it be an evaluation on the job, someone berating you for no reason, but you're like, that is not my story. But the great who said, whomever it is, will impress upon you that you ought to believe it because we said so. I had that experience. This story leverage assessment is my graph, my HBDI. Let me tell you the first time it was given to me. It said because my A quadrant is what it is. Well, let me give you some information here. The dotted line is under stress. The solid line is under steady state and everyone's happy. Who would agree with me that life is actually stressful most of the time? And especially if you're in business, life is stressful all the time. If you have a business problem, it's typically a personal problem that's waiting to be evaluated. We'll say it that way. Back to the graph. Because I'm a classically trained engineer, you see my A quadrant, my blue quadrant in steady state is pretty good, not a problem. And then you look at my B quadrant, yes, I have some process ability, great. You look at my C quadrant, that means I'm pretty likable and I like people. And then my D quadrant goes off the chart. The assessment from the great who said was, you are a head in the clouds, emotional man, and you'll never really get anything done because if you look at my dotted line, under stress, my acuity for what's happening right now goes way far out. My innovation for the future pretty much stays the same and pushes out a little bit further. My C quadrant, which is my emotional feeling, goes even further out. But if you look at that B quadrant, it almost flatlines. That means under stress, time becomes irrelevant. So the great who said, you'll never be able to do this, any other thing in business or life because this is your profile. This profile is what saved my life. So what I would impress upon you is that just because someone gives you a story that's their story through their filters, it may not serve you. And I would encourage you to know your own story, stay in it, and act accordingly. You don't need all the time in the world to validate yourself. You don't need all the time in the world to take action. So you may not have tomorrow because it may only be 2 breaths away. So to recap, there are 4 stories in life. And I don't care if you're a man, woman, child, or if you're a molecule. Physically, something will happen. Actually, you're going to perceive something. The emotional story will take a hold of you instantaneously, and then you have a feelings bridge. That bridge will take you over into your data bank for all the information that you currently have because you're going to try to make sense out of the whole thing, and then from there you're going to create a future, and therein lies your belief, which will either put you in a heaven or condemn you to a hell of your own making. So, this is all fresh. The incident that I speak to only happened 45 days ago. And I've been out of step with life since then. Business has gotten better, relationships have flourished, and my ability to stand in front of you and say life is what you make of it. Not because I say so, but because I found evidence 15,000 years ago that said they were onto something, and I found a tool that measures it, that says this is very valuable today. I invite you to make your stories not only valid, but powerful. Thank you.